When the doctors said I only had 3 days to live, I expected to see sadness in my husband's eyes. I expected to see him cry. I expected him to hug me, to tell me not to let go. But what I saw was something I will never forget, as long as my heart still beats. He took my hand with that smile I knew so well. That smile that for 32 years I had interpreted as love, as complicity. But at that moment, in that cold room at Thomas's hospital, with the smell of disinfectant burning my nostrils, that smile transformed into something completely different. He leaned close to my ear as if to whisper words of love, the kind he used to tell me when we were young, and he said, "Finally, only 3 days. Your house and your money are mine now." I felt the world stop. The heart monitor started making a different sound. Nurses rushed in. My husband quickly pulled away, feigning concern with that perfect mask I had just discovered he wore. But I wasn't dying of sadness, I was dying of rage. And there, with doctors injecting something to stabilize my pressure, with my husband holding my other hand and calling me my love in front of everyone, I made the most important decision of my life, a decision he never saw coming. Because what my dear husband didn't know was that I still had 3 days. 3 days to destroy every single one of his plans. 3 days to show him who really owned everything. 3 days to turn his dream into his worst nightmare. Before I tell you how I did it, I need you to know something. If you're listening to this right now, please leave me a comment telling me where you're listening from. You don't know how much it helps me to know that there are women like you, like me, who need to hear this story. Like this video, subscribe to the channel because I'm going to tell you exactly how a woman on the brink of death achieved what many don't even dare to dream. Stay until the end, because what I did in those 3 days will leave you speechless. Now, let me tell you the whole truth from the beginning. My name is Eleanor. I'm 63 years old, although until a few months ago people told me I looked 50. I was born in Bristol, but I've been living in London since I married Robert 32 years ago. 32 years. More than half my life, beside a man I thought was my companion, my confidant, my reason for being. Robert was an accountant when I met him. I worked as a secretary in the same firm. He would arrive every morning with his worn briefcase, his suit that had clearly seen better days, but with a smile that lit up the whole office. I fell in love with that smile. I fell in love with that man who seemed to have dreams as big as mine. We got married 6 months after meeting. I was 31 and he was 35. It was a simple wedding at the local church with a small reception in a hall that barely fit 50 people. Robert didn't have money for anything more elaborate, and I didn't care. I thought we would build our empire together, and we did. But what I didn't know was who I was building it for. You see, when we got married, I owned a small flat that my grandmother had left me. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms in an area that wasn't very sought after then, but it was mine, completely paid off. My grandmother bequeathed it to me because I was the only one who cared for her during her last 5 years of life. Robert was always very affectionate about that. "Don't sell it, my love," he would say. "That flat has enormous sentimental value. Besides, someday it will be worth much more." I thought he was romantic, that he valued my roots, my memories. For the first few years, we both worked. I continued as a secretary, he as an accountant. We saved every penny, ate cheap meals 5 days a week to save money. We'd get up at 5 inches the morning to take the tube together. We'd come back tired but happy. Or so I thought. 5 years into our marriage, Robert suggested we open our own business, an accounting firm. "We have experience. We have clients who know me. We can do it," he would say with that enthusiasm I loved so much. The problem was the initial capital. We needed money for the office, for equipment, for permits. Without a second thought, I mortgaged my grandmother's flat. I took out a loan of £200,000, all in my name, because Robert had some small debts from his bachelor days and the bank wouldn't approve anything for him. "Don't worry, love," he said as I signed the papers with trembling hands. "In 2 years we'll pay everything off. You'll see how this business will change our lives." And yes, it changed them, but not as I expected. The firm started to grow. Robert was good at what he did, I can't deny that. Clients recommended him. In 3 years we had 5 employees, in 5 years, 10. Money started flowing in a way we had never imagined. I left my job to help him with the firm's administration. I managed the accounts, paid employees, dealt with clients. We were a perfect team, or so I thought. 10 years after opening the business, Robert proposed something that filled me with pride. Eleanor, I want to buy a house. A real house. Big, beautiful, in a good area. You deserve it after all your hard work. We found a beautiful house in a gated community in North London. 3 bedrooms, a garden, a garage for 2 cars. It cost £2 million. We sold my grandmother's flat for £500,000, which by then had increased significantly in value. And we took out another loan for the rest. Put everything in your name, my love, Robert said. You have a better credit history. Besides, it's protected that way. If anything happens to the business, no one can touch the house. I thought he was clever, that he was looking out for me, that he was a far-sighted husband. I signed everything. The house was in my name, the loan too. The next 20 years were constant work. The firm continued to grow. We moved to larger offices. Robert hired more accountants, more secretaries. I continued to manage everything, working 12 hours a day, making sure every penny was well invested. We never had children. At first we tried, but it didn't happen. After a few years, we decided it wasn't important. You and I are enough, Robert would say. Besides, that way we can focus on building our assets. Our assets, that word he used so much. Throughout all those years, Robert was an attentive husband. He brought me flowers every Friday. He never forgot our anniversary. We went out for dinner at least once a week. On Sundays, we had breakfast together while reading the newspaper. It was a quiet, comfortable, predictable life. 2 years ago, I bought another flat as an investment, a larger one, in an even better area. I bought it with my personal savings, with the money I had earned at the firm. Robert insisted, "Put it in your name. Like everything else, it's safer that way." I obeyed as always. A year ago, I started feeling unwell, constant fatigue, headaches, nausea. I went to the doctor thinking it was stress, that I was working too much. The tests showed something worse, much worse. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. When I told Robert, he cried, he hugged me, he promised we would fight together. "I won't leave you alone for a second, my love," he swore. "We'll beat this together." The treatments began chemotherapy that left me shattered, radiation that burned my skin. Robert accompanied me to every appointment. He held my hair when I vomited. He made me chamomile tea when I couldn't sleep from the pain. I thought I was lucky, that I had an exceptional husband, that not all women were so fortunate in their marriage. How naive I was. 3 weeks ago, my condition worsened. The doctors admitted me. The nurses looked at me with pity. Robert slept on a chair next to my bed every night, or so it seemed, until that day. That damned day, when the doctors said 3 days, and my husband's mask finally fell. After Robert left the room that day, with his satisfied smile and his poisoned words still burning in my ears, I remained completely immobile. The nurses kept checking my vital signs, adjusting the IV, asking if I felt okay. I nodded mechanically, but my mind was elsewhere. I was reconstructing the last 32 years of my life as if they were pieces of a puzzle I had never seen complete. And suddenly, everything started to make sense. That same evening, Robert returned to the hospital around 8 p.m. He brought my favorite takeaway from a nearby restaurant: roast chicken, Yorkshire puddings, and gravy. He walked in with that smile that I now saw differently, as if I were looking through a pane of glass that was once opaque. He sat by my bed, placed the food on the bedside table, and gently took my hand. The same hand he had held hours earlier while telling me my house and money would soon be his. I watched him. I truly watched him for the first time in years. I noticed things I had overlooked before, like how his eyes avoided mine when he spoke to me, how he constantly checked his phone, even there in the hospital, always with the screen turned away so I couldn't see anything. I tasted the food, though every bite tasted like metal. Robert spoke of trivial things, that he'd gone to the office for a couple of hours, that everything was fine, that clients were asking about me, that everyone was sending their best wishes, all so normal, all so perfect. When he finished feeding me, because my hands were trembling too much, he stood up and said he would go for a coffee at the hospital cafeteria. He kissed my forehead. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, my love." The moment he walked out that door, I grabbed my phone. My fingers trembled, I don't know if from illness or adrenaline. I dialed a number I never thought I'd use again. Lucy, our housekeeper of the last 15 years. A 8-year-old single mother of 3, who cleaned our house 3 times a week. A woman I had always treated with respect, whose salary I raised every year, for whom I paid for health insurance because Robert said it wasn't necessary, but I insisted. She answered on the 3rd ring. I didn't have time for pleasantries. I told her exactly what I needed. I told her to come to the hospital first thing tomorrow morning before Robert arrived, that I needed to talk to her about something urgent, something that would change her life and mine. Lucy hesitated. I heard the fear in her voice, but I also heard something in mine that convinced her. She agreed. Robert returned 15 minutes later with his coffee. I had already put my phone away, already had on my mask of a dying, grateful wife. That night, he stayed sleeping on the chair in the room, as he had done every night before. I pretended to sleep, but I didn't close my eyes. My mind was racing at 1,000 revolutions per minute. I remembered things, many things. I remembered 5 years ago when he insisted we update our will. He took me to a solicitor who was his university friend. All very professional, very well organized. The solicitor explained that since we had no children, the most logical thing was for everything to go to the surviving spouse. Robert nodded seriously. I signed without reading all the details. I trusted him. I trusted his friend the solicitor. I remembered 3 years ago when he suddenly started insisting that everything should be in my name. The house, the flats, even the main bank accounts. I thought it was because he wanted to protect me, because he loved me. Now I understood the truth. If I died, he inherited everything automatically, and there was no one else. No children, no living siblings of mine. My parents had passed away years ago. There was only Robert, my dear, patient, loving Robert. I remembered the last 6 months. How every time I mentioned updating my will to leave something to my nieces and nephews who live in Manchester, Robert would subtly change the subject, always saying we had time, that I shouldn't worry about that now, that I should focus on healing. I remembered something more disturbing. 4 months ago, my doctor had told me that the treatments were working better than expected, that there were real possibilities of remission, that I should be optimistic. I came home excited, crying with happiness, and told Robert. He hugged me, congratulated me, told me I was a warrior. But that night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him talking on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, but the walls of our house weren't that thick. I didn't understand the whole conversation, only snippets. Something about timing, about papers, about making sure everything was in order. At the time, I didn't pay it much mind. I thought he was talking about work, clients, business matters. Now I understood he was talking about me, about my death, about his plans. I also remembered something that always struck me as strange, but that I justified in 1,000 ways. Robert never wanted to have a joint bank account for large expenses. He always insisted that I manage all the important money, that he only needed his personal account for small expenses. I thought it was because he trusted me, because he saw me as a better administrator. The truth was simpler and darker. If anything happened to the business, if he had debts, if there were legal problems, nothing could be touched because everything was in my name. And when I died, everything would pass to him completely clean, without any legal complications. He had built the perfect plan for 32 years, and I had been his willing tool. The next morning, Robert got up early from the chair, stretched, complained about back pain from sleeping in an uncomfortable position, kissed me on the cheek, and said he would go home to shower and change, that he would be back in a couple of hours. I nodded weakly. I told him it was okay, to rest a bit, not to worry. The moment he left, I called Lucy. She arrived 30 minutes later, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept. She sat by my bed and took my hand. I told her the truth. I told her what Robert had said. I saw the shock on her face, the disbelief, then the rage. Lucy had worked in my house for 15 years. She had seen everything. She had seen me get sick. She had seen me weak, vulnerable, fighting for each day. And she had seen Robert play his role as the perfect husband. I asked her if she was willing to help me. I told her that if she did, I would give her enough money so she would never have to clean anyone's house again, so she could send her 3 children to university, so she could live with dignity the rest of her life. Lucy didn't hesitate for a second. She squeezed my hand and said yes. Then I gave her my first instruction. I asked her to go to my house, to my personal study, where I kept all my important documents. I gave her the combination to my small safe. I told her exactly what papers I needed her to bring me. She left the hospital like an arrow. Robert returned 2 hours later, showered, in clean clothes, smelling of his expensive cologne I had given him for his last birthday. He brought me freshly squeezed orange juice and the newspaper. He sat down to read me the news as he did every morning. I listened to him, watched him act, and for the first time in 32 years, I saw my husband exactly as he was. A man who had invested more than 3 decades in building his fortune using my name, my trust, my love. A man who had patiently waited for me to be terminally ill to finally collect his investment. A man who didn't know I still had 3 days and that I intended to use every second of those 3 days to destroy him. Lucy returned to the hospital that afternoon with a discreet bag. Robert had gone out for lunch, as he did every day at 1 o'clock. I had exactly 45 minutes before he returned. Lucy locked the room door. She took all the documents I had asked for out of the bag, spreading them on my bed, as if they were cards in a game where I finally held the winning hand. There were all my papers, the deeds to the house, the titles to the 2 flats, the bank statements, the will, the firm's documents. But there was something else, something I hadn't even asked her to bring. Lucy placed an old manila envelope on the bed, somewhat battered by time. I recognized it immediately. It was the envelope my grandmother had given me the day before she died, more than 30 years ago. She had made me promise to keep it, never to lose it, that someday I would understand why. I had stored it in the back of my safe and honestly had completely forgotten about it. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were documents yellowed with age. I read them once, then again, and a third time, because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Lucy looked at me curiously, but she didn't ask anything. She simply waited. What I held in my hands was the deed to a plot of land, a 5-acre plot on the outskirts of London that my grandmother had bought in the 1,960 seconds for next to nothing. Land that at the time was worthless because it was far from everything, in the middle of nowhere. But that land was no longer in the middle of nowhere. For the past 20 years, the city had grown exponentially. That area was now one of the most desirable in London. There were shopping centers, luxury residential developments, corporate headquarters for international companies, and I owned 5 acres in the heart of all that. My grandmother never told me in words. She just gave me that envelope and asked me to keep it. She died 2 days later. I was 29 and too consumed by grief to check what was in that envelope. I put it away and forgot about it. For 34 years, that land had been there, silently growing in value while I lived my life unaware that I was a millionaire. I asked Lucy to take out her phone and look up the current value of land in that area. She searched for several minutes, checking different real estate websites, comparing prices. When she looked up, she was pale. That land was worth approximately £80 million, perhaps more if we found the right buyer. £80 million that Robert didn't know existed. £80 million that wasn't in any of the documents he had meticulously reviewed for years. £80 million that he would never touch. I laughed. I laughed so hard I started to cough, and Lucy had to give me water, but I couldn't stop laughing. It was a bitter laugh, full of irony, full of poetic justice. My grandmother, from her grave, had given me the perfect weapon. I told Lucy to sit down, that I needed to explain exactly what we were going to do. She took a small notebook from her bag and started taking notes. First, I needed a solicitor, but not just any solicitor. I needed someone who had no connection to Robert, to his world, to his contacts. Lucy told me her brother was a solicitor. He worked in a small firm but was honest and discreet. Perfect. I asked her to call him immediately, to tell him to come to the hospital that very night after Robert had left, that it was urgent and that I would pay him very well. Second, I needed immediate liquidity. I gave Lucy my personal account number, One I managed alone and that Robert almost never checked, because it only held the small savings I kept for personal expenses. I asked her to go to the bank and withdraw everything she could. It was about £200,000. It wasn't much compared to the rest, but it was enough to get started. Third, and this was the most important thing, I needed Lucy to become my eyes and ears in my own home. I asked her that when she went to clean, as she always did on Tuesdays and Thursdays, she should pay attention to everything. Robert's phone if he left it lying around, his papers, his conversations, anything that might be useful. Lucy nodded to everything. There was a determination in her eyes that I recognized. It was the same determination I feel now. The determination of a woman who is tired of being invisible, of being used, of being underestimated. We put all the documents back in the bag just in time. 5 minutes later, Robert walked through the door with a smile and a fruit smoothie he had bought for me from an expensive organic place. He gave it to me with so much love, so much tenderness, so much falsehood. I took the smoothie and smiled at him. I thanked him. I told him I didn't know what I'd do without him, and he stroked my hair, thinned and brittle from chemotherapy, and told me, "You'll never have to find out, my love. I'll always be here for you." That night, after Robert went home to sleep, because the doctors told me I needed to rest without visitors, I received a visit from Lucy's brother. His name was Fred. He was about 45, thin, with glasses, with that appearance of someone who works hard and earns little. But his eyes were intelligent and honest. I told him everything, absolutely everything. Every detail of my marriage, every property we owned, every document, every bank account. And finally, I showed him the deed to the land. Fred whistled softly when he saw the document. He reviewed it carefully, verifying every seal, every signature, every legal detail. It was completely legitimate. My grandmother had bought and registered it properly. She never sold it, never mortgaged it, and she had bequeathed it directly to me in her will. Fred explained something crucial. Since that land had been bequeathed to me by my grandmother before I got married, and since it had never been registered as a matrimonial asset, that land was completely mine. Robert had no right to it, nor did he even know it existed. I asked him what we could do, how much time we had. Fred was direct. I had 2 days left according to the doctors. We needed to act fast. The first thing we did was draft a new will right there, in that hospital room with 2 nurses Fred brought as witnesses. A will where I left the land, the house, the flats, and all my money divided in this way. 50% for Lucy and her 3 children, 20% for my nieces and nephews in Manchester, 20% for a cancer charity, and 10% for Fred for his legal services. Robert did not appear anywhere in that will. Fred explained that legally, as a spouse, Robert had the right to contest the will and claim at least 50% of the matrimonial assets. That meant the house and the flats we had bought during the marriage. But he couldn't touch the land. That was exclusively mine. I asked him what the house and flats were worth together. Fred had done the calculations. Approximately £12 million in total. Robert would fight legally and probably get £6 million, maybe a little more. But he had been imagining keeping everything. The £80 million from the land he didn't know existed, the house, the flats, the bank accounts, the firm. He had been imagining keeping more than £100 million, and he was going to end up with 6, but that wasn't enough for me. I didn't just want to take his money. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted him to understand that he had lost. I wanted to see him destroyed. Fred looked at me curiously when I told him that. I explained what I had in mind. At first, he hesitated. He told me it was risky, that it could go wrong, that perhaps it was better to just leave it and let Robert find out after my death. But I insisted. I told him I had 2 days to live, and I was going to use those 2 days exactly as I wanted. Fred finally accepted. He told me he would make the necessary calls, that he would prepare everything. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Despite the pain, despite the illness, despite knowing I had less than 48 hours left, I slept well because I knew Robert was going to learn the most expensive lesson of his life, and that I was going to be there to see it. The morning of the second day dawned cloudy. I remember looking out the hospital window and thinking that even the weather knew something big was about to happen. Robert arrived at 8 o'clock, sharp as always. He brought my favorite breakfast, a full English with black pudding and a pot of strong tea. He looked rested, almost cheerful. Of course he was cheerful. In his mind, he only had one more day of acting left. He sat by my bed and patiently began to feed me. I pretended to be weaker than I actually was. I would drop food, tremble exaggeratedly, close my eyes as if every second was a monumental effort, and Robert bought every second of my performance. While feeding me, he talked about trivial things, that he hadn't slept well, that he missed having me at home, that the house felt empty without me. Every word was a knife wrapped in velvet. What Robert didn't know was that while he slept peacefully in our bed, Fred had been working all night. At 10 a.m., Robert said he had to go out for a moment, that he needed to go to the office to check on some urgent matters, that he would be back in 2 hours. I nodded weakly. I asked him not to worry about me, that I would be fine. He kissed my forehead and left. 5 minutes later, Fred walked through the door with his briefcase and a smile that gave me hope. He had done everything I asked. The new will had been registered with a notary public since 6 a.m. It was completely legal and ironclad. He had paid for express services that cost extra but guarantee immediate processing. He had also contacted a real estate appraiser specializing in commercial land. The man had reviewed the location, the documents, the development possibilities. His official valuation was £85 million, even more than we thought. But Fred had done something else. Something I hadn't asked him to do, but which showed how clever he was. He had discreetly contacted 3 large property developers. He had shown them the land's location, not the documents, just the location. All 3 had shown immediate interest. One of them had offered £90 million in cash if we closed the sale in less than a week. £90 million. I told Fred to wait, not to sell anything yet. First, I needed Robert to know what he was losing. Then we could sell. Fred nodded. He pulled more papers from his briefcase. He had investigated the accounting firm. It turned out that legally, the firm was registered as a corporate entity, but I was the majority shareholder with 60% of the shares. Robert had 40%. I hadn't even known that. Robert had registered everything that way from the beginning, probably for the same reasons he put everything else in my name. Legal protection, and now that protection was turning against him. Fred explained that according to my new will, my shares in the firm also passed to my heirs. Robert would keep his 40%, but he would lose total control of the business he had built for 30 years. The irony was delicious. I asked Fred about Lucy, what she had found out at my house. Fred smiled in a way that let me know the news was good. Lucy had gone to clean the house the day before, as she always did on Tuesdays. Robert arrived home around 3 p.m. He didn't know Lucy was there because she was cleaning upstairs. Robert went into his study and closed the door. Lucy, following my instructions, quietly approached. The study door didn't close completely, something I had always asked him to fix, but which I was now grateful he never had. She heard Robert talking on the phone. His voice was different, colder, more calculating. Lucy recorded the entire conversation on her phone. Fred pulled out his laptop and played the audio. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Robert's voice said, "Almost there, Maurice. The doctors said 3 days, and 1 has already passed. By Friday, everything will be settled." A male voice on the other end responded something that wasn't clear. Robert continued, "Don't worry, everything is in her name. The will is clear. I inherit everything automatically. The house is worth about £4 million, the flat's another 8. The bank accounts have another £3 million, and the firm, well, that's worth whatever we want it to be worth." More murmurs from the other side. "Of course, I'm sure. No children, no living siblings. Her parents died years ago. I just have to wait for nature to take its course today, and everything will be mine. 32 years of investment are finally going to pay off." There was a pause. Then Robert laughed. A laugh I had never heard in all our years of marriage. I know. It sounds cold, but that's business, brother. She was a good woman, helpful, reliable, the perfect kind of wife for a man who needs to build assets. She always signed where I told her. Never questioned anything. The perfect wife. My hand trembled as I listened, not from weakness, but from pure fury. Robert continued. "A little sad, I suppose." We got along well, but it's not like I truly loved her, Maurice. It was a practical decision from the start. I needed capital. I needed someone with good credit. I needed stability. She gave me all of that. The voice on the other end said something else. Another woman? Don't be ridiculous. I didn't have time for that. I was too busy building this empire. But now, brother, now I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm 67, still young. With 15 pounds million in the bank, I can remake my life however I want. The recording ended there. Lucy had had to move away because Robert was about to leave the study. Fred turned off the laptop and looked at me. Tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of betrayal, of 32 years of my life reduced to a business investment. I asked Fred to save that recording in several secure places, to make copies, to upload it to the cloud, to make sure it was never lost. Then I gave him my next instructions. I wanted him to contact my nieces and nephews in Manchester, to explain the situation, to tell them they were going to receive an inheritance, but that I needed them to come to London immediately, that they should arrive tomorrow, on the last day. I wanted him to prepare all the necessary documents to prove that Robert had no right to the land, to have them ready to show at the exact moment, and I wanted him to get something else, something Fred at first didn't understand, but when I explained, he smiled with admiration. I wanted a notary public, an official notary to come to the hospital tomorrow, and I wanted Robert to be present when that notary arrived. Fred asked if I was sure, if I really wanted to do it that way. I told him I had never been more sure of anything in my life. Robert returned to the hospital at 12:30. He brought Chinese food, my favorite. He looked relaxed, content. He told me everything was fine at the office, that clients sent their regards, that everyone was worried about me. I ate what I could. I listened to him talk, and every word was like listening to a stranger. This man sitting by my bed was not the man I married. Or perhaps he had always been this man, and I had been too blind to see it. That afternoon, the doctors came to examine me. They discussed my condition in front of Robert as if I weren't there, which was ironic considering they were talking about my death. They said my condition was critical, that I probably wouldn't make it to Friday, that I might not even get through tonight. I saw the flash of emotion in Robert's eyes. I saw it. It was barely a second. A micro moment of satisfaction that crossed his face before he put on his mask of a devastated husband. He took my hand and squeezed it. He told the doctors to do everything possible to keep me comfortable, that money was no object, that he just wanted me not to suffer. What a great actor my husband was. When the doctors left, Robert stayed with me. He talked about memories, our first flat, when we opened the firm, all the things we had achieved together. Every word was true. Every word was a lie. Yes, we had achieved things together, but for him, I had only been the tool, the signature on the documents, the name on the deeds, the convenient wife who did everything he needed. That night, Robert stayed sleeping on the chair in the room. The doctors had suggested he not leave me alone, that these could be my last hours. I pretended to sleep, but in reality, I was planning. I went over every detail of what would happen tomorrow, every word I would say, every moment of his destruction, because tomorrow Robert was going to learn that the foolish, trusting, and helpful wife he had used for 32 years had turned out to be much cleverer than he ever imagined. Tomorrow, Robert was going to discover that underestimating a woman can be the most expensive mistake in a man's life. And I was going to be there to see every second of his face as his perfect world crumbled at his feet. The last day of my life, according to the doctors, dawned with bright sunshine. How ironic that the day of my death would be so beautiful. Robert woke from the armchair at 6 a.m. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, disheveled. He approached my bed and gently took my pulse, as if he were a worried husband, checking that his beloved wife was still breathing. I opened my eyes slowly. I looked directly at him. "Good morning, my love," he said with that soft voice he had perfected over 32 years. "Good morning, Robert," I replied. My voice sounded stronger than it had in days. He noticed. I saw the surprise on his face. "You sound better," he said, though he didn't sound particularly happy about it. "I feel better," I told him. "In fact, I feel clearer than ever." Something in my tone put him on alert. I saw it in his eyes. That survival instinct that all liars develop. I asked him to help me sit up in bed. He did, arranging the pillows behind my back. He offered me water. I drank it. "Robert," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "I need you to stay here today, all day. Don't go to the office. Don't leave at all." He frowned. "My love, I have some important things. Please," I interrupted. "It's my last day." The doctor said it. "I just want you to be here with me." I saw the conflict on his face. He wanted to leave, to do whatever he had planned, but he couldn't refuse a dying woman's request without seeming like a monster. "Of course, my love," he said. "I'll stay all day." Perfect. At 9 a.m., Lucy arrived. She brought the breakfast I had specifically requested: Scotch eggs, bacon sandwiches, and hot chocolate. Robert was surprised to see her, but I explained that I had asked her to come, that I wanted to see a familiar face, someone else besides him. Robert accepted the explanation. Lucy put the breakfast on the bedside table and stood by the window, as if she were just another visitor. But I knew she was there for another reason. She was my witness and my moral support. At 10 a.m., my nieces and nephews arrived from Manchester. There were 3 of them: Diana, 40, Charles, 38, and Michael, 35, the children of my deceased sister. Robert tensed when they entered. He wasn't expecting visitors. "Eleanor," he said in a low voice, "I didn't know you had invited your family." "It's my last day, Robert," I told him, in a weak voice. "I want to say goodbye to everyone." He couldn't refuse that. My nieces and nephews hugged me carefully, with tears in their eyes. Robert greeted them cordially, as he always had, but I noticed his discomfort. At 11 a.m., Fred arrived. Robert immediately recognized him as Lucy's brother, but he didn't understand why a solicitor was there. "Good morning," Fred said politely. "I'm Fred Davies, solicitor. Mrs. Eleanor asked me to come." Robert looked at me, confused. "A solicitor? Why do you need a solicitor, my love?" "To put my affairs in order," I said simply. "Sit down, Robert. This concerns you too." I saw panic begin to form in his eyes. He still didn't understand what was happening, but his instinct told him something wasn't right. Fred opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. He placed them on the bedside table where the remnants of breakfast still lay. "Mrs. Eleanor," Fred said in a professional voice, "are you in full possession of your mental faculties at this moment?" "Completely," I replied clearly. "Are you being coerced in any way to do what you are about to do?" "No, this is entirely my decision." Robert was standing now, his fists clenched. "What is going on here, Eleanor?" I looked at him. I truly looked at him. This man who had shared my life for 32 years. This man who had used me as a tool to build his fortune. This man who had patiently awaited my death as if it were a business closing. "What's going on, Robert, is that I'm finally seeing clearly," Fred continued. "Mrs. Eleanor has drafted a new will, as is her legal right to do so." Robert went pale. "A new will? Eleanor, we already have a will. We made it 5 years ago with my friend the notary." "Yes," I said. "The will where everything went to you. How convenient, wasn't it?" There was a heavy silence in the room. My nieces and nephews looked confused. Lucy maintained her position by the window. Fred awaited my instructions. "I want you to hear something, Robert," I said. I signaled to Fred. Fred took out his laptop, found the audio file, and pressed play. Robert's voice filled the room, his conversation with Maurice. Every word, every confession, every poisoned truth. I watched as the blood drained from his face. I watched as his hands began to tremble. I saw the exact moment he realized everything was lost. When the audio ended, no one said anything. The silence was deafening. 32 years, I finally said. My voice was no longer weak. It was firm, strong, filled with a cold rage I had been holding back. 32 years of my life, and for you, I was just a business investment. Eleanor, Robert tried to speak, but I interrupted him. "No," I said firmly. "No more lies. I've heard enough lies for a lifetime." I turned to Fred. "Proceed with the reading of the new will." Robert took a step towards the bed. "Eleanor, please, can we talk about this? It was just a stupid conversation with my brother. It didn't mean anything." "Your brother, Maurice?" I asked. The same Maurice who's going to be your partner in the firm once I die, right? The same Maurice with whom you've been planning how to divide my inheritance." Robert opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Fred began to read. "I, Eleanor Mary Davies, widow of Sutton, being of sound mind, dispose of my assets as follows." As Fred read, I watched Robert crumble. Every word was a blow. The house divided between my nieces and nephews and Lucy, the flats to the Cancer Research UK charity, the firm's shares distributed so that he lost majority control, but the best part was yet to come. "Additionally," Fred continued, "Mrs. Eleanor is the sole owner of a 5-acre plot of land located in—" "What land?" Robert interrupted. His voice was almost a scream. "Land I inherited from my grandmother 34 years ago," I explained calmly. "Before I met you, before I married you. Land that was never a matrimonial asset. Land that is worth approximately £90 million." I watched Robert sway. He literally had to hold onto the wall. £90 million, he whispered. "Yes," I said. £90 million that you never knew existed. £90 million that you will never touch. Charles, my eldest nephew, spoke for the first time. "Aunt Eleanor, I don't understand. This man is your husband." "On paper," I replied, but in reality, he was just a business partner who played his part very well for 32 years. Robert fell to his knees beside my bed. Tears streamed from his eyes. "Eleanor, please. I know I made mistakes. I know I said horrible things, but we can fix it. There's still time." "Time?" I asked. "Time for what, Robert? For you to convince me to change my will? For you to manipulate me one more time?" "No!" he cried. "Time for me to show you that I did love you, that you did mean something to me." Lucy spoke from her spot by the window. Her voice was clear and strong. "Mr. Robert, I heard you yesterday when you said on the phone that Mrs. Eleanor was helpful and reliable, the perfect type of wife for a man who needs to build assets. Are those words of love?" Robert looked at her as if she had just betrayed him. You were listening?" "I was cleaning your house," Lucy replied with dignity, "as I have for 15 years, as I did even when you didn't even notice I existed." Fred continued with the reading. He explained that Robert, as a spouse, had the legal right to claim 50% of the matrimonial assets. That meant approximately £6 million between the house and the flats. £6 million, I said to Robert. "Of the £100 million you were imagining, you're left with 6. I hope 32 years of acting were worth it." Robert stared at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Eleanor, please, I'm your husband. Are you leaving me on the street?" "On the street?" I repeated with a bitter laugh. "You have £6 million, your share of the firm, and your health. I have terminal cancer and hours to live." "Who is really on the street, Robert?" He had no answer for that. Fred pulled out more documents. "Mrs. Eleanor has also given specific instructions regarding her funeral. You, Mr. Robert, are not invited." Robert looked up sharply. "What? You can't. I'm your husband." "You are my husband on paper," I said, "but I don't want you there feigning sadness. I don't want your final performance. I've had enough of your performances." Diana, my niece, came closer and took my hand. Tears were in her eyes. "Aunt, we didn't know any of this." "There was nothing you could do," I said softly. "But now you can. Now you can make sure he doesn't get away with it." Fred placed the last document on the table. "This is a document where Mrs. Eleanor formally renounces any obligation to support Mr. Robert after her death. He will not receive a pension, will not have access to any bank accounts, will not have rights to the firm beyond his original 40%. All legal," I added, looking at Robert. "All signed before a notary public. All ironclad so you cannot contest it." Robert was openly weeping now. "Eleanor, please, don't do this. I know I hurt you. I know I was an idiot, but 32 years have to mean something." "You're right," I said. 32 years means something. They mean I was foolish enough to trust you all that time, but they also mean I finally learned my lesson." I turned to Fred. "Is there anything else I need to sign?" "Just your final signature here, Mrs. Eleanor. And with this, everything will be complete." I signed the last document with a trembling hand, not from weakness, but from the emotion of finally having justice. Robert rose from the floor, His face had changed. There were no more tears. There was rage, pure hatred. "This isn't going to end here," he said with a cold voice. "I'm going to fight every document. I'm going to challenge every signature. I'm going to hire the best solicitors." Fred smiled. "Go ahead, Mr. Robert. Waste your time and money. Everything is in order." It was reviewed by 3 different solicitors. "You have 3 witnesses present. It was recorded on video to prove that Mrs. Eleanor is in full possession of her faculties. You have no chance of winning." "Recorded?" Robert looked around and finally noticed the small camera Fred had discreetly placed upon entering. "Everything," I confirmed. "Every word of this conversation, every one of your tears, every lie, all recorded." Robert looked at me with a hatred I had never seen in him before. "You used me," he spat the words. "You waited until the last moment to destroy me." "No, Robert," I said calmly. "You used me for 32 years. I just took one day to defend myself. There's a big difference." He grabbed his jacket from the chair. "I'm not going to stay here and listen to this." "No," I said. "Don't stay. Go. Go live your new life with your £6 million. I hope it's enough for everything you had planned." Robert walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He looked at me one last time. 32 years, Eleanor. Wasted. "Yes," I replied, "but I'm not going to waste another day." He left and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in the room like a final thunderclap. There was silence. Then Lucy started to applaud. My nieces and nephews joined in. Fred smiled proudly. I just breathed. I breathed with a freedom I hadn't felt in decades. Robert was gone, and with him, 32 years of lies. But I was still here, weak, ill, dying, but victorious. And that was all that mattered. After Robert left that room, something strange happened. The pain I had been feeling for months, that constant pain reminding me every second that I was dying, seemed to lessen. It didn't disappear. The cancer was still there, but it was as if my body could finally rest because my mind had found peace. My nieces and nephews stayed with me the rest of the day. They told me about their lives, about their children, about their jobs. Diana was a teacher, Charles an engineer. Michael managed a small restaurant. Normal, honest, hard-working lives. I told them I was proud of them, that their mother, my sister, would be proud too. Lucy sat by my bed and took my hand. "Mrs. Eleanor," she told me with tears in her eyes, "you changed my life today." "No, Lucy," I replied, "you changed mine. Without you, none of this would have been possible." She cried. She cried for me. She cried for herself. She cried for all the women who have been invisible for too long. Fred stayed until he was sure everything was in order. Before he left, he told me something I will never forget. "Mrs. Eleanor, in my 20 years as a solicitor, I have never seen anyone defend their dignity with such strength. You are a warrior." That night, the doctors told me my condition had miraculously stabilized, that perhaps I had more time than they thought. Not much more, but something. I smiled. My body had been waiting to finish what it had to finish, and now that it had, it could finally let go. The following days were strange. Robert didn't return to the hospital. He didn't even call. It was as if he had never existed. My nieces and nephews took turns staying with me. Lucy came every day with home-cooked meals, with stories of her children, with plans for her future, now that she had the resources to give them a better life. Fred kept me informed of everything. Robert had hired a solicitor, as he had threatened, but every attempt to contest the will was rejected. The documents were solid. The evidence was irrefutable. After a week, Robert accepted the settlement. He kept his £6 million and his 40% of the firm. He signed all the necessary papers for the division of assets. Fred told me that Robert looked like a destroyed man, that he had aged 10 years in a week. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I just felt nothing, as if that chapter of my life had simply closed. The land was sold 2 weeks later. A property developer offered £92 million. Cash, no conditions. Fred handled everything. The money was divided exactly as I had specified in my will. 50% for Lucy and her children, 20% for my nieces and nephews, 20% for Cancer Research UK, and 10% for Fred. Lucy cried when she received the check. £46 million, more money than she had seen in her entire life. "Mrs. Eleanor," she told me, "my children will be able to go to university. I'll be able to have my own house. I'll be able to live with dignity." "That's exactly what I want," I told her, "that we all have dignity." My nieces and nephews use their share to pay off business debts, to buy houses, to secure their children's futures. They called me every day to thank me, to tell me I was an angel. I wasn't an angel. I was just a woman who had finally learned to defend herself. The doctors continued to be surprised. My cancer hadn't disappeared, but it wasn't progressing as they expected either. They gave me days, then weeks, then months. I knew why. My body was waiting for me to finish sorting things out, and there was still one more thing I needed to do. A month after that day in the hospital, I asked to be taken back to my house, the house I had bought with the money from my grandmother's flat, the house where I had lived for 20 years with a man who never loved me. My nieces and nephews set me up in the main living room, brought nurses, medical equipment, everything necessary to keep me comfortable. Robert no longer lived there. He had moved into a small flat with his share of the money. The divorce papers had been processed quickly. We were nothing to each other anymore. I sat in my living room, in my home, surrounded by people who truly loved me, and finally, I felt at home. Lucy came every day, but no longer to clean. She came as a friend. She sat with me. We drank tea. We talked about life. She told me she had bought a beautiful house in a good area, that her children were in good schools, that one of them wanted to study medicine. "All thanks to you," she would always say. "No," I corrected her. "Thanks to your bravery. Thanks to you not hesitating when I asked for your help." Diana, my eldest niece, quit her poorly paid teaching job and opened her own private school with her share of the inheritance. She invited me to the inauguration. I went in a wheelchair, weak but happy. The school was called Eleanor Davies. My name. My legacy. I cried when I saw the sign, not from sadness, from pride. Charles used his share to expand his engineering business. He now employed 20 people. He told me that every time he hired someone, he thought of me, of how I had given him an opportunity. Michael transformed his small restaurant into a chain of 3 locations. Successful, prosperous, happy. He brought me special food every week, dishes he prepared thinking about what I could tolerate with my illness. Cancer Research UK used the £20 million to open a free treatment centre for low-income women. They named it the Eleanor Centre, another legacy. Another way my name would live beyond me. Fred was still my solicitor, but he had also become my friend. He visited me regularly, kept me informed of everything. He made sure no one tried to take advantage of me in these last months. He told me that Robert had tried to sell his share of the firm, but no one wanted to buy it. Clients had discovered the truth about how he had treated me. Many left. The business he had built using my name was collapsing. I felt no satisfaction from that, only emptiness, as if Robert was a character in a story that no longer interested me. It's been 6 months since that day in the hospital. The doctors still don't understand how I'm still alive. They say it's a miracle, that I should have been dead months ago, but I know why I'm still here. I'm still here because I'm finally living, truly living, not just surviving, not just enduring, not just sacrificing, but living. Every morning, I wake up in my house, which now truly feels like mine. I have breakfast with Lucy, or one of my nieces or nephews. I read, I watch television. I enjoy the garden that I never had time to enjoy when I worked 12 hours a day at Robert's firm. Some people have asked me if I regret anything, if I regret spending 32 years with a man who didn't love me. The truth is, yes. I regret not having opened my eyes sooner. I regret having been so trusting. I regret putting a man's love above my own worth. But I don't regret defending myself in the end. I don't regret fighting for my dignity in my last days. I don't regret using my last strength to make sure that man didn't benefit from my death. Because there's something I learned in these last months, something I want all the women listening to this story to know. No matter how long you've been in a bad situation, no matter how many years you've invested in the wrong person, no matter how weak you feel, you always have the power to defend yourself. You always have the right to reclaim your dignity. And it is never, ever too late to seek justice. I was 63 years old, dying of cancer, with 3 days to live, according to the doctors, and yet I found the strength to fight. So you, the woman listening to this right now, whatever your situation, I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think. You are more valuable than you've been led to believe. And you deserve to live with dignity, with respect, with true love. Don't let anyone use you. Don't let anyone make you feel invisible. Don't let anyone wait for your death to benefit from your life. Defend yourself, fight, reclaim what is yours, because life is too short to waste it with people who don't value your existence. And believe me, I know, because I wasted 32 years, but my last 6 months have been worth more than all those years combined, because I'm finally living on my own terms. I am finally free. And if I could do it on the brink of death, you can do it too, with a whole life ahead of you. Before I finish, I need to ask you something. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, if it made you reflect on your own life, leave me a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me if you too have felt invisible in your own life. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, share it. Because maybe there's another woman out there feeling as invisible as I felt, who needs to know that you are not alone. Like this video, subscribe to the channel because there are more stories like this. Stories of women who found their strength, stories of justice, stories of dignity recovered. We are not alone. None of us are alone. And that is the most powerful thing there is. My name is Eleanor Mary Davies. I am 63 years old. I am dying of cancer, but I am living more now than in all the previous years of my life. And when my last day finally comes, I will leave knowing that I was not the victim of Robert's story. I was the heroine of my own story. And that is priceless.